The city was a cage of artificial light that never slept. Below, the drone of machinery and the ceaseless river of traffic formed a mortal hum. Above, the first songs of birds were swallowed by the noise. Lin Wei sat cross-legged on the cold concrete of his rooftop. A pre-dawn breeze, sharp and biting, did little to cool his skin. Steam rose from his shoulders in the dim light, each wisp carrying away the fire of his exertion. Before him, the world fell away. Ancient mountains, their spines black against the bruised purple of the horizon, stretched for 100 li. They were silent guardians, veterans of epochs, their jagged peaks wreathed in mist that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. He drew a breath. It was not a simple intake of air. It was a conscious act of pulling the world's essence, the ambient qi, deep into his dantian. Iron vein breathing technique, he whispered, the name an oath. It was a brutal, ancient method, a pre-core formation art that forged the body before the spirit. Most cultivators deemed it too slow, too agonizing. They sought to build palaces of qi without first laying a foundation of stone. A low groan escaped his lips. His ribs shifted, a sound like old wood creaking under immense weight. Every muscle fiber pulled taut, twisting into cords of living steel that threatened to snap. Pain was the master of this technique. It was a teacher with a cruel but honest hand. A stabbing heat shot through his marrow. It was not the burn of a simple workout, but the feeling of bone being tempered, of impurities being forcefully purged. His meridians were not the smooth, wide highways of a master. They were treacherous mountain paths, filled with rubble and thorns. The qi did not flow, it ground its way forward. He closed his eyes, his mind focused inward. He pictured not a gentle stream, but a river of molten iron pouring through his limbs. The vision was a command to his body. Endure. The fiery torrent surged from his heels, scorching a path up his spine and branching into his shoulders. His skin felt too tight, a fragile container for the raw power churning within. Crack! The sound was sharp, intimate. A tendon in his forearm stretched past its limit, then re-knitted a fraction stronger. Sweat poured down his face, dripping from his chin and stinging his eyes. He ignored it. Pain was a signal, not a barrier. The Tao manifests in harmony between endurance and flux. Lin Wei muttered the scripture, his voice raspy, each word an anchor in a storm of agony. To master the flesh is to witness the foundation of the ethereal. His focus narrowed to a single point. He reached out, his hand a blur of motion. His fingers closed around a stack of weathered paving stones left on the roof. Bang! Bang! The stones did not break. They disintegrated into a fine powder, the impacts echoing like muted gunshots in the morning air. A cloud of gray dust rose, dancing slowly in the breeze. The veins on his arms stood out like angry blue rivers. Some pulsed with a faint, crackling light, the unmistakable sign of qi threatening to burst free from its fleshy prison. He listened, not with his ears, but with his entire being. He felt for the subtle rhythm of his breath, aligning with the surge of qi. Then, a sound no one else could hear, a deep, resonant pop from the center of his being, in his dantian. It was the sound of a bottleneck shattering. The world tilted, colors sharpening. The distant hum of the city seemed to fade, replaced by a clarity that was almost overwhelming. A tiny, nascent flame flickered to life inside him. It was small, fragile, but it burned with the promise of a future conflagration. The office was a different kind of hell. The constant buzz of the fluorescent lights was an assault on his newly sharpened senses. The sterile, cramped desks felt like coffins arranged in neat rows. Lin Wei's fingers flew across the keyboard.
His movements were impossibly smooth, each keystroke precise and without wasted energy. The reports he typed were mundane, but his focus was absolute. Around him, his colleagues slumped in their chairs. Their faces were masks of fatigue, their movements slow and heavy. They were drowning in the quiet desperation of mortal life. But Lin Wei's breath was a steady, rhythmic tide. The qi in his dantian, though still weak, was a coiled serpent, condensed and waiting. His reflexes, honed by pain, were a razor's edge. He paused, rolling his shoulders and stretching his fingers. As his hand opened, a tiny spark of blue-white energy flickered at his fingertip for a fraction of a second. It was an unconscious leak of power, a sign of instability, but also a testament to his progress. A voice cut through his concentration. "Lin Wei, spaced out again?" Coworker Zhang leaned over the cubicle wall, a mocking smirk on his face. "What's with the mystical daydreaming, thinking you can wish the work away?" Lin Wei did not turn. His eyes, calm as ancient stone, remained fixed on his monitor. "When one touches the edge of the Tao, the world feels like a shadow play," he voiced, flat, devoid of emotion. A dismissal so complete it was a slap in the face.
Zhang blinked, his smirk faltering. He opened his mouth, then closed it, retreating back into his own cubicle in stunned silence. In the break room, the air was thick with the buzz of small talk, like flies circling carrion. Zhang found his courage again, his voice loud and intended for an audience. "Thinking you're some cultivator or immortal, huh?" he sneered, gesturing toward Lin Wei. "Wake up before the boss catches you slacking." Lin Wei turned, his gaze finally falling upon Zhang. It was not a look of anger. It was something far colder, as deep and empty as the void between stars. "Your ignorance is the heaviest burden you carry," he said, his voice level. A sudden chill filled the small room. "It blinds you to the true end creeping ever closer." As he spoke, dust motes on the floor stirred, swirling in a silent, deliberate vortex around his feet. The effect was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet profoundly unnatural. Zhang took an involuntary step back. His hairs on his arms stood on end. He felt a pressure in the air, an unseen weight that made it hard to breathe. A quiet warning hung between them, as tangible as a drawn blade. Outside the sterile office, beyond the notice of mortal men, the fabric of the world was fraying at the seams. Evening cast long, distorted shadows across Lin Wei's small apartment. The news was on, the screen a window into a world of escalating chaos. The footage was shaky, captured from a distance, showing a remote mountain valley torn asunder. Entire hillsides were shattered, the rock pulverized by fists that struck with the force of meteorites. Low-ranking cultivators, their robes stained with blood and dirt, bled for scraps of territory and resources. The reporter called it the Thunder Fist technique. It was a brutal art that channeled explosive qi through the user's bones, turning their strikes into localized explosions that shook the very earth. Streaks of raw lightning, a byproduct of unstable qi, ripped through the melee. Sect formation arrays, designed to protect and conceal, flickered and cracked like shattered glass. Giant beasts roared. An azure drake, its scales the color of a stormy sky, coiled around a peak, spitting torrents of energy. Below, a stone-hide bear, as large as a house, swatted cultivators from the air like flies. "Experts warn of a rupture in the Tao balance," the anchor said, his face a mask of grim gravity. "Ancient rivalries are reawakening." Lin Wei's eyes burned, reflecting the on-screen carnage. "The Tao reels in agony," he whispered to the empty room. His gaze was fixed, his mind racing. This was not just a skirmish, it was a symptom of a deeper sickness. If the low-ranking spill this much blood from mere spirit stones, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. the elders and the great beast clans will be drawn forth. The Epoch of Ascendance begins. Outside, the wind howled, carrying a faint, resonant hum from the direction of the mountains. It was the sound of the world's laws beginning to vibrate out of tune. The ancient peaks watched, their silence no longer peaceful, but expectant. Lin Wei's body ached with the memory of his training, a fire in every vein and muscle. But his spirit, that tiny flame in his dantian, burned brighter than ever before. Pain and clarity had woven themselves into a single unbreakable thread. His path was set. Between the mortal world and the coming storm, between the agony of the flesh and the promise of Qi, the fragile Tao called out, and he would answer.